Chandragupta I was the contemporary of Constantine the Great, the Roman emperor who founded Constantinople. During the times of the later Guptas, the Roman Empire split up into the Eastern and Western, and the Western was ultimately overthrown by the northern barbarian tribes. Thus, just about the time when the Roman Empire was weakening, India had a very powerful state with great generals and mighty armies. This was an extract from a letter written by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru to his daughter Indira from Naini Central Jail. As the letter says, in the beginning of 4th century AD, while Rome was disintegrating, India witnessed the rise of a consolidated imperial power in the Guptas. The initiation of Gupta dynasty marked the beginning of a second empire in India. As a young researcher, I have been working on the Guptas for the past 2 years. And I feel that just as we have enough reasons to look up to the West today, there was a time in history when the West also had enough reasons to look up to us. Not surprisingly, therefore, several historians and scholars have asserted the Gupta age as the classical age of Indian history or even the golden age. It was a time when Indian art, culture and literature attained impressive standards. However, there is a controversy on the early history, origin and establishment of the Gupta Empire. In the writings of Professor D.N. Jha, we find that the eclipse of the Kushanas in North India and of the Satavahanas in the Deccan in the 3rd century ushered in a period of political atomism and paved the way for the emergence of several minor powers and new ruling families. It was in this situation that the Guptas laid the foundation of an empire. In the Puranic texts, particularly the Vishnu Puranas, refer to 3 early Gupta kings, Sri Gupta, Ghatotkacha Gupta and Chandragupta I. Chandragupta I's accession to the throne in 320 AD marks the beginning of Gupta era in Indian history. The most significant kings of Gupta Empire were Chandragupta I, followed by Samudragupta, Chandragupta Vikramaditya, Kumaragupta I and Skandagupta. The death of Skanda in about 467 AD was followed by a succession of weak line of kings who failed to keep the empire intact and succumbed to the mighty invasion of the Hunas in 5th century AD. Unlike their predecessors, one of the important reasons why the Gupta period has attracted scholars from both India and abroad is because of the abundance of sources available. Numerous epigraphs, extensive coins, literary sources, both indigenous and foreign accounts, have inspired several historians to reconstruct the history of the Gupta period. The foundation of the Gupta Empire created a growing influence over the Middle Ganga Valley and around Pataliputra as well. In this connection, I would like to read out an extract from one of our leading historians' book, Professor Romila Thapar. Professor Thapar says, despite the rise and fall of many kingdoms in the centuries following the Mauryan period, the imperial ambition did not die, and there were frequent attempts to emulate the Mauryas, but none of these met with same success. The rule of the Gupta dynasty in northern India is often described as an imperial government, but this description is not entirely accurate. In course of my research, I had approached Professor Srila Roy to get an overall idea about the foundation of Gupta state and empire. Professor Roy, do you think the Gupta rulers were successful in building up a pan-Indian empire?
Well, Paromita, I definitely think that the Gupta rulers were successful in establishing an empire, but it lacked the pan-Indian character of the erstwhile Mauryan state. The political power that the Gupta rulers built up was concentrated only in northern India. In this context, I think I should refer to both Dr. R.C. Mazumdar and Professor A.S. Altekar. They have both referred to the contemporary powerful Vakataka rulers who held political hold over central India and northwestern Deccan for a long time. And so these historians feel that this age should rather be called the Gupta Vakataka age and not just the Gupta age.
So, how was the Gupta state structured?
Well, you see, Paromita, a few historians have remarked that the Gupta state was multi-centered rather than being a unitary structure, right? And as such, it had a core area, and here in this core area, Samudragupta had uprooted some of the earlier rulers and had brought them under the direct administration of the royal officials. Now, besides the core area, there are the border kingdoms where the border kings would pay tribute to the imperial Guptas, and they would also attend the court. They would attend the imperial court. And in course of time, these tributary neighbors, they became known as the Samantas. And they later on, their position was elevated to a very high level, you know, and to a very high level of social order, and they became known as the feudal vassals. Again, we find that Samudragupta partially subdued some of the tribes who lived between the border areas and the core area. So these are the few divisions that we can make.
So, is it correct to argue that in spite of their brilliant military achievements, the Gupta rulers failed to construct a pan-Indian empire?
Now, you must remember that at a time when the Guptas rose in power in the north, the Deccan witnessed the rise of a few powerful kingdoms. For example, there were the Vakatakas and their later collateral, the Vatsa Gulma branch. There were also a number of smaller and less significant kingdoms like the Nalas, the Bhojas, the Traikutakas, the Kalachuris, the Salankayanas, the early Pallavas, and
the
Panduvamsis, the Vishnu Kundings, the Sarabhapurias, etc., etc. And the far south also saw the rise of some important dynasties like the Western Gangas and the Kadambas. Just as there were the Eastern Gangas in the territory of Kalinga, there were the Western Gangas in the Karnataka region.
From the comments of Professor Srila Roy, it is clear that the Gupta Empire was not a pan-Indian empire since it couldn't penetrate down south. Yet, the Gupta Empire was a highly centralized empire with strong foundations. If one has to know about the state and structure of a particular realm, first and foremost, one has to learn more about the centralized administration of the particular empire. In my course of research, I had also consulted Professor Tapoti Sengupta to know more about the structure and system of the central administration of the Guptas. Professor Sengupta, I would like to ask you, what was the power and position of the Gupta monarchs, and how did the nature of monarchy differ from that of the Mauryas?
Although there was almost a time span of 500 years between the Mauryas and the Guptas, the Gupta monarchs were also played a pivotal role in the administrative system, just as their Mauryan counterparts. Like their Mauryan counterparts, the Gupta monarchs were also head of the entire administrative system. He was the supreme commander of the armed forces. He was also the principal executive. He was the one who received and sent envoys. But because of this great time gap between the two monarchies, we find there was an immense increase in the power of monarchy so far as its inherent characteristic was concerned. While the Mauryas were happy with simple titles like Devanampiya or the beloved of the gods, the Guptas, they considered themselves as the representative of gods on earth.
Yeah, and perhaps that's the reason why they took titles like Maharaja Dhiraj, King of Kings.
Yes, they took titles like Maharaja, Dhiraja, but the titles like Parama Daivata, Parama Bhagavata, these indicate the emphasis on the divine element of the kings. In the Allahabad pillar inscription, Samudragupta describes himself as an equal of Kuvera, that is the god of wealth, Varuna, the god of the skies, the Yama or Indra. Yama is the god of life and death, as you know, and Indra is the god of gods. So this shows that there has been an evolution in the concept of the monarchy in these 500 years, and that is a very important change in monarchy that had taken place. But like their Mauryan counterparts, again the king was the pivot of the administrative system, and the institution of monarchy was considered as the only kind of administrative system even in the Gupta period.
So, what was their mode of succession?
Most of the times the reigning monarch selected his successor, but it was not always honored after the death of the reigning monarch, and that is why we find that parallel branches of the main line were established at times. Another very important factor, that the personal prowess of the monarch, that was emphasized in the time of the Guptas, and the titles that they took, Parama Bhattaraka, Parama Daivata, Vagravala Parakrama, Vikramaditya, these are the indications that the personal prowess of the monarch played a very important role in the making of the Gupta monarchy. And unlike their Mauryan counterparts who adhered to the heterodox religions, the Gupta kings were Brahmanical monarchs, and it is because of their Brahmanical faith that they performed many sacrifices, of which the Ashwamedha was very important, and they strongly believed that the performance of these sacrifices would bestow greater power in them, which might have some mystical elements.
So, what was the arrangement like at the center, the administrative arrangement?
Yes, just as Kautilya had said that a single wheel cannot move, that the king always needs other officials to help him in his administration. In the Gupta period also we find a number of manifestations of this. We find that the Guptas were helped by a number of ministers, although the Mantri Mandali was not always a regular feature or a very static feature in the Gupta administrative system. We find a number of ministers, and these ministers or these commanders of the armed forces, we always find the epithet Maha attached to their names or to their offices, which indicates the importance of the office in the administrative system. So we find Maha Sandhi Vigrahika, Maha Danda Nayaka, these are the officials who helped the Guptas. Although the Gupta king was a supreme commander of the armed forces, he was also the head of the judicial administration. In the Mauryan period we find the system of punishment, that was very strict. That was almost inhuman in the Mauryan period, but we find a great deal of laxity in the time of the Guptas. And we need not think that because the Guptas were immensely powerful, that there was no check on their power. They were also very much controlled by the Shastras, the existing laws of the land. They were very much controlled by the various advisors and the ministers. There were these heads of the guilds. The guilds played a very important role in the Gupta economy, and the heads of the guilds had great control or great influence, we should say, over the king.
So, what was the mode of appointment to these officers?
Although in the Gupta period we find that there was no formal examinations for the appointment of officials to different posts, there was a great deal of hereditary element in the Gupta period. Like the Kumara was the highest official from the royal family who would be sent to the provincial posts, the Yuvaraja who would succeed the father. And we find that the sons of various officials, they would be appointed to the position which their fathers held. But although being Brahmanical, the Guptas did not make any discrimination on the basis of religion for the appointment to various posts. Like Virasena, who was the commander-in-chief of Chandragupta, was a Buddhist. And at the same time, appointment of the same person to different offices were also made. Like Harisena, he was the commander-in-chief of the Gupta army in some expeditions. This Harisena became a court poet, and for some time he also held very important position in the royal kitchen. So offices were interchangeable. There was no religious bias in the administration, in the appointment of officials, and also the hereditary element played an important role.
So what was the position of the queens, and did they enjoy any kind of political prominence in the Gupta polity?
Yes, some of the queens were very prominent, like Kumara Devi, the queen of Chandragupta I. She was the daughter of the Lichavi family, and the Lichavis are politically very important, and this alliance was considered to be very important for the Guptas, and they celebrated this alliance by minting gold coins with Chandragupta I and Kumara Devi standing together, and with the epithet that Lakshmi Lichavaya, or the Lakshmi which was given by the Lichavis to the Guptas. And the daughter of son of Kumara Devi, that is Samudragupta, was anointed the successor of Chandragupta I by Chandragupta himself. And then we find Dhruva Devi was a very important queen of Chandragupta II, and Dhruva Devi's daughter Prabhavati Gupta, who was married to the Vakataka family, played a very important role. After the death of her husband, she became the regent of the infant Vakataka monarch. But we do not find that the queen played any important or vital role in the administrative decisions of the Guptas.
From the insights of Professor Tapati Sengupta, we come to know that the Gupta administration had a highly monarchical setup, yet the monarchs were not absolute despots. There was a considerable check on their powers, governed by the Brahmanical institutions, the Shastras and other laws of the land. On the other hand, the Guptas also had a pronounced provincial administrative setup. And to know more about the provincial administrative system, I had also consulted Dr. Rita Chaudhary. Dr. Chaudhary, can you tell us how far was the provincial administrative system centralized during the Gupta period?
Well, as you must be knowing that the most important source of information for the Guptas is the Allahabad Prasasti of Samudragupta. Herein, for the first time, we find that a large administrative zone equivalent to a province being referred to as the Bhukti. The Bhuktis were under the Uparikas, and the Uparikas were directly appointed by the Gupta emperors. In the time of Buddhagupta, much later, we find that the Uparikas are being referred to as Uparika Maharajas. Significantly, what indication that we get is that the Gupta emperors directly controlled the provinces and appointed their governors. But at the same time, at the lower level of administration, we find considerable amount of decentralization.
So what were the features of decentralization in the administrative setup of the Guptas?
Districts in the Gupta administration were known as Vishayas, and these Vishayas were ruled by the Vishayapatis, who were appointed by the Uparikas. that the Uparikas themselves were being appointed by the Gupta emperor themselves. Now in these districts, the form of administration is to be known from the inscriptions that we get from the various regions, and they do not represent a standardized form. As for examples, from 5 Damodarpur copper plates which we find from northern Bengal, we know that the Vishayapatis had their headquarters at Kotivarsha, at a region named Kotivarsha. They were assisted by various officials and reference to them have been made. Amongst them were the Nagar Shrishti or the chief trader, the Shattavaha, the caravan leader, Prathamo Kulika, the chief artisan, and the Pratham Kayastha, the chief scribe. Apart from the last, none of them are official personages. They are locally important people and representatives of locally important social groups. The Guptas are credited with the inclusion of non-officials in the district board. What their functions were is not clear, but at least we know that they were important enough because they were informed and applied during land transactions. In other inscriptions found from northern Bengal, we find references to 2 important rural social communities. They were the Mohattaras and the Kutumbins. Both of them were well-to-do agriculturists, but from Gupta plates it is clear that the Mohattaras were more important than the Kutumbins. Next we go to the administration at a lower level. These were the Vithis, which are referred to in Bengal inscriptions. The Vithis were an administrative tier over several villages, and in this way they integrated the village rural setup into the political administrative setup of the Guptas. Herein too we find mention of the Bithi Kulika or the local artisan. So maybe over here also where the non-officials were integrated into the administrative setup. Another important group that is mentioned here is the Ashto Kulodi Karono or the Gramostho Kulodi Karono. Literally it may mean representatives of 8 leading families, and thus they were non-officials, but alternatively some scholars have also said that they were local level officers and hence government personages. But an in-depth study into the inscriptions make it clear that non-officials were integrated into their structure, and so it can be said that in the district and in the lower levels of administration, the Guptas appointed non-officials in the work of administration, and large part of the administration was dependent on them.
So what was the level of dependence?
With regard to the Ashtakulodhi Karono, it can be said that it was a supra-local body who provided an interconnection between the villages which were under them, and also provided linkages with the upper strata of administration. This process of decentralization, albeit necessitated by new socio-economic factors, was a new experiment of the Guptas. They provided an expression for local aspirations, and as they provided connection with the apex local body and the local level administration. So it was an important mode of in the political administrative setup of the Guptas.
So why do you think decentralization was necessary?
Well, as you know, Paramita, the Guptas had through their conquest amalgamated a huge territorial setup. It was peopled by various social groups who had various interests. It was necessary for the Guptas to integrate the varied interests into a single political setup. It may also indicate the spread of state society into areas which had not experienced a political setup before. It was a pre-state society. So, when they were establishing an empire, if we can call it an empire as such, it was necessary to combine all these interests within a single fold. So, it must be that they decided that decentralization was the best way to bring them together.
Now, after consulting three eminent scholars on Gupta state and administration, one can make three significant observations on the Gupta Empire. First, the Gupta Empire was not a pan-Indian empire since they could not extend their direct control in the Trans-Vindhyan region. Second, though the monarch reigned supreme, yet he was not the absolute power. His powers were highly restricted by Brahmanical laws and injunctions. Third, the Gupta Empire portrayed combination of both centralization and decentralization, where power was disseminated amongst the local level, however, which gained momentum at a much later period. In this connection, I think it is relevant to quote R.S. Sharma, another eminent historian, who said that the Gupta period was a proto-feudal period. Though the state and administration of the Guptas contributed immensely in making it a model for others to emulate, yet what makes it the golden period of Indian history is the paramount cultural achievements. I am still carrying on with my research on the Guptas, and I believe that we shall be in a position to discuss the cultural history of the Gupta dynasty some other day.